Welcome to Around Kansas. I'm Deb Goodrich.
And I'm Michelle Martin.
Behind me is an old image of Burnett's Mound, southwest of Topeka. And in a few minutes, when we get into this episode, I'll tell you why this is significant to our story today.
And behind me, this is the desk of a woman by the name of Sharlot Hall. And if you don't know who Sharlot Hall is, you will after today, and how Kansas was important to her and the mark she left on the history of the American West.
So I was fortunate when I was out visiting with Michelle a couple of years ago to visit the Charlotte Hall Museum in Prescott. And wow, what an incredible place! And so, Michelle, you got to go back recently. So, what a treat!
Yeah, Deb, my husband Don and I decided we needed to get out of the Phoenix metro. When you live in Kansas and Oklahoma, as long as I did, you're used to wide open space, and you're not used to all the overcrowding in the neighborhoods. And so, if I don't get up north every so often, I get a little stir crazy. So we went to Prescott. Prescott's beautiful. It's in the mountains. You've got more wide open spaces, and as you remember when you were there with me, you've got beautiful cottonwood trees. And for anybody who leaves Kansas or Oklahoma, you miss the cottonwood trees. And so we were there for a couple of days, and we rented a little bungalow on Airbnb. And literally, when you went on the front porch of the bungalow, you could see the backside of the Charlotte Hall Museum. And yeah, it was great. So I went ahead and our last day in Prescott, we went back to the museum, and I don't care. I can go there every year and walk through it and see something different or see
Mhm.
something in a different way every time I go through. But the museum is really because of the work of one woman, and she was born in Kansas. Charlotte Hall was actually born in Lincoln County, Kansas in 1870. And she lived the first 11 years of her life in Lincoln County, Kansas, until her family decided to pack up and head west. And they made their way to Arizona Territory. As a matter of fact, her family followed the Santa Fe
The
Trail.
trail.
See, Deb's right. See, we can connect everything to the Santa Fe Trail in Kansas, folks, if you just give us enough time to do so.
Yeah.
But near Dodge City, in their travels near Dodge City, she was actually thrown off of a horse and suffered an injury. And it was either her back or her hip. It was in that region, and it caused her a great deal of pain then, and it continued throughout her life. But she and her family went to the small ranching community of Dewey in Arizona Territory, which is not far from Prescott Valley and Prescott. And over time, she became an advocate for preserving the territorial history of Arizona. And she did so by not only writing down the history herself, but she also collected all kinds of um, all kinds of materials, furniture, clothing, books, everything that belonged to a lot of these early pioneer families. She began to collect as they began to pass away, and it became the nucleus of the museum.
If I remember correctly, she also advocated for Arizona's coming in separately from New Mexico. There was talk of bringing them in as one state, and she's the one, and that's a lot of
Hmm.
territory, but the population was not that big. So, there were advocates of just bringing it in as one big state, but she saw the wisdom in doing it otherwise.
She did. And she believed that the history, even though there were some shared aspects of the history of New Mexico and Arizona, she believed that they needed to be separate states. And she actually after she graduated from high school, she began working as a writer and she began writing all kinds of stories, but then reflective pieces. And she believed that Arizona had some very distinct, unique geographical, geological, and
Mhm.
natural history features that made it different from New Mexico and it merited being its own state. And she understood the importance of not coal, but cattle, cotton, citrus, copper, and other thing, and climate to Arizona's history and its development. And so she actually wrote pieces about the history of Arizona, and she actually became the territorial, if you will, the territorial historian and state historian. And so she was the first woman to be an office holder in the
Isn't that
state.
something?
Yeah, and we're talking, before women had the ability to vote. So she becomes an advocate for Arizona coming into the state, into the union as its own state. But she writes pieces and then has them printed, and she delivered them to Congress and put them on the desks of every member of the House of Representatives and every member of the Senate. So they all had her writings. And when they were actually going through the process of voting and deciding how Arizona was going to enter the union, she actually wore a special dress. Her hat was made out of dried pieces and parts of different kinds of cacti from Arizona. And so different parts of the cacti were dried and woven together. And then there were pieces from prickly pear cacti and others that made her hat. And she had a dress, and the oversheath was made of a very, very fine, delicate, not chain mail, but copper mail. And it's small links of copper that were woven together to make an oversheath. So her copper dress and her cactus hat are in the museum today. Right across the exhibit is actually a chest of drawers that her family had when in Lincoln County, Kansas, that survived that long trek on the Santa Fe Trail. And you can see it there in the museum today. But she was a prolific author, wrote numerous books. One of her most famous was called Cactus and Pine. And I happened to be looking for a copy. I did a living history program at Sharlot Hall. Um, oh gosh, the second summer I was spending time in Arizona after I moved west, and I went to a rare bookseller and started looking through, and they had a copy of Cactus and Pine. I picked it up. I think I paid $35 for it. First edition, first printing, still had the original dust jacket. And I noticed a couple of the pages were stuck together. So I very carefully got them unstuck to reveal it was actually signed by Charlotte Hall.
How cool. That's wonderful. Well, behind me again is Burnett's Mound, which has its own incredible history near Topeka. But one of my favorite stories is from Julia Stinson, who was a Shawnee Indian who lived in the Shawnee County uh, area there, actually close to Tecumseh. And Julia recalls riding up Burnett's Mound and picking wildflowers with John C. Fremont. And
Oh,
what an incredible story she shared, and what an amazing memory. And she talks about putting those in the making an apron, from her dress and carrying wildflowers. So, Michelle, tell the folks what John C. Fremont has to do with your story.
well, Deb, actually, John C. Fremont and his wife Jessie and their daughter Lily made their way to Arizona, where he served as Arizona's one of Arizona's territorial governors. And understanding the historical significance of the home he lived in Prescott, because he had some financial interests in railroads and mining in Arizona. Charlotte Hall was one of numerous individuals who helped save the Fremont House. And it is on the grounds of the Charlotte Hall Museum. And when you walk in today, it obviously does not have any of the Fremont's belongings,
Mhm.
but it is set up in the same fashion that theirs would have been. So when you walk in the parlor, you have the main parlor, and to the left, you would have had John and Jesse's bedroom. To the right was Lily's bedroom, and there would have been a dining area and a kitchen, and then the back room in the house was their son's bedroom. And so you can actually go in and see that today when you go to the museum. And I don't think people realize there's so many Kansas Missouri connections to Arizona territory. Obviously the most famous would be Wyatt Earp and his brothers who go to Tombstone. Big Nose Kate goes with them, and actually you can go to, and actually Wyatt's common law wife Maddie Blaylock, Maddie Blaylock, who she died of a drug overdose after the Vendetta ride and whatnot. And she's buried in a very difficult to find and get to cemetery, not too far from Superior, Arizona. But Deb, you went with me, and who did we visit in the cemetery in Prescott?
Oh, honey, that was cool. That was cool. With a great big fat crow, overlooking the whole thing. It was kind of bizarre, but Big Nose Kate herself.
Hmm.
It was pretty cool, and it looked like a lot of other people had been to see her because they had left, stones and coins and little memorabilia there, and so in the same cemetery, though not as prominently placed as Charlotte Hall. Charlotte was on
Hmm.
top of the hill,
Yes.
and Kate was sliding down the hill, but
Yes.
still in the same place. So that was pretty cool.
But and I think what I think is interesting is there are probably more people go to that sliding down the hill portion of the cemetery and visit Big Nose Kate. And literally, as my husband and I were leaving town last week, we were just pulling out and heading toward Prescott Valley, and I said, "Oh, there's something important we have to do." And I literally got to a stoplight, made a U-turn and went back, and he said, "Where are we going?" And I said, "You don't think I'm going to leave town without saying my proper hello to Big Nose Kate and Charlotte Hall?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah, I got to go to the cemetery." Okay. And so we turned right around and went right back to Pioneer Home Cemetery so we could go ahead and pay our respects to Big Nose Kate. And I always leave Kate a little offering. I always bring a little. I always try to bring a little airplane bottle of something delicious for her to drink. And so I left her a little Jack Daniels on her grave. I'm sure somebody came along and found that
I'm sure
already.
they did.
But there's a really neat. There's a big jar that you can take the lid off of, and there's a book inside, and you can leave notes to Big Nose Kate. And then there are all the things that the items that people leave for her. But then there's a solar light, so at night that light will kick on and you can find her grave. There are no solar lights, of course, near Charlotte's grave, because she's atop the hill, and there's actually some cemetery lights at the top of the hill. So we went to visit Kate first and then went up the hill to see Charlotte. So I always have to when I'm there. And Charlotte, I actually had picked a couple of flowers when I was out walking around. And so I put a couple of flowers that I picked off of a couple of trees and put them on Charlotte's. I thought she'd appreciate that more.
I'm sure she did. Well, the Charlotte Hall Museum is just phenomenal. So, if you get to Prescott, if you're maybe seeing the sights in Arizona, and Prescott is just one of my uh, favorite towns. I enjoy it so
Hmm.
much, and of course, I really like Flagstaff too. I really like that. But um,
Hmm.
yeah, so stop and pay your respects and tell them that Deb and Michelle sent you over there, and say a big hello from Kansas.
And they are always really happy to meet anyone from Kansas. one of the docents we were talking to asked where we were from, and I said, "Well, I'm originally from Michigan, but I lived in Kansas." Charlotte was from Kansas. I said, "Yes, Lincoln County." And I started explaining some of the history of Lincoln County, and she said, "Ooh, I need to get my notebook." And she got her little notebook and was writing down
Cool.
notes. And she said, she said, "Not many people can tell me about Lincoln County, Kansas." She said, "They're from Wichita or Kansas City or Topeka or Lawrence." She said, "Not many people come here and know anything about, Lincoln
Yeah.
County." So she was pretty excited. But no, they're awfully happy to meet people who are from Kansas and know that connection between Charlotte and her family, and their Kansas connections to obviously their time in Arizona.
Cool deal. All right, folks, stay with us. We'll be right back.
In 1821, a trade route was opened from Missouri in the United States across prairies and mountains to Mexico. In 2021, we will mark 200 years of epic conflicts and grand adventures, larger-than-life personalities, and sweeping landscapes. Join us on an historic journey. The Santa Fe Trail lives on.
Find us on social media or santafetrail.org. Welcome to the Western Kansas Wildlife Travel Center, right here in my hometown of Oakley, Kansas. We're the front door of Western Kansas, located on 3 main highways, I-70, US 83, and US 40. And all those roads lead to history, beautiful scenery, and adventure, no matter which direction you go. We now have an IHOP. That brand that you've trusted up and down the road in all your travels is staffed with local folks, real people just like you and me, and we're waiting on you to join us. So for fun, adventure, fuel up, fuel your body, and let's have some fun.
I don't know how you could be a historian and not love maps. And maps have evolved over the years. And of course, if you're spending any time outside and if you're going from one place to the other, you have to have a map. Now, many of our maps today are actually GPS programs. They're apps, and we just ask Google where to go, or for a while there, it was the Garvin, but however they're delivered, maps are just such an incredible piece of finding your way. And I think maps would be a wonderful gift this year, especially for young people. And, I think Michelle and I were talking about this the other day. I'm not the most technologically advanced person. And Noelle helped me figure out that I could actually change the orientation on my phone's GPS so that north is at the top of the map. And that is meaningless to a lot of people who did not grow up looking at maps. Their orientation is just what's in front of them. But having that northern orientation at the top of the map just made all the difference to me to know where I'm at. So we wanted to just suggest that maybe you pick up some maps, globes. The globes are still pretty awesome. And there's so many antique maps. I know one of my favorite maps is one I got from Lloyd Zimmer, Books and Maps, many moons ago.
Mhm.
And that is the Commonwealth of Virginia in 1855. So that's before West Virginia seceded from Virginia. And it's all one big happy state. And Michelle, you've got a really unusual map behind you there.
Yeah, Deb, this is actually a map that you would have seen in the Indian Territory, which is the eastern half of Oklahoma, at a very specific time, right at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. And this is a region that was proposed as the state of Sequoia. And by studying the maps of the Indian Territory, you can see how Oklahoma Territory develops in the western part of the state, Indian Territory develops in the east. You can see the various land runs and land openings and Cherokee strips and different areas. But you can see the state of Sequoia movement. And this was actually supposed to be a fully American Indian state that would have come into the Union as an American Indian state, would have been run by American Indians. And it really was the region that was comprised of the 5 southeastern tribes. So that would be your Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, Muskogee, and Seminole. And so they were looking at bringing that whole area in as its own state, and it caused a lot of political upheaval. And so studying those maps is absolutely fascinating and really important to understanding our history.
It is. And when you look at maps of the Kansas Territory, for example, and you see the territory extending all the way to the Continental Divide, then when we came in as a state, that changed. Why did those maps change? It's just a great history lesson, a great geography lesson, and when you have the kids in the car, give them a map and let them help find how you get there. We were just talking the other day, are states going to keep on printing state maps with everybody using GPS programs? I don't know. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, because that's a big expense. And one of the maps that I'm going to share a picture of is in Kansas. I love gazetteers. The state Department of Parks and Wildlife puts out a hunting gazetteer atlas, hunting atlas, that is free. I said free, Free, free. And it is phenomenal. Oh my God. It's more up to date than the expensive gazetteer. It's just incredible. And by the way, I've got to share that cool picture of Mr. Tiny helping me navigate with holding the gazetteer upside down, which is just priceless. You try, folks, but start them early.
Yeah, well, Deb, the issue becomes, depending on where you are in the country, sometimes when you get outside of the metro areas and you're driving, as you well know, there are certain parts of Western Kansas, there are certain parts of Oklahoma, there are certain areas here in Arizona and New Mexico where you lose, cell service. And once you lose that service or you don't get good data service through the cell provider, your GPS navigation is useless unless you pay for OnStar and have an OnStar equipped car. And, OnStar is not cheap. So it really is still important to have those maps in the glove box and know how to read them and use them. And, I remember growing up, when we would go on family trips, my dad had an atlas. And he would go ahead, he literally would sit down a day or two before and he'd look at where we were, look at where we wanted to go. He would look at the inset maps of the cities. I mean, he would literally plan out and mark out the route on it. So we knew exactly where we needed to go. And the maps are fantastic. They, like I say, you can learn a lot about the history, especially, Kansas Territory, for example. You can learn so much about the shifting boundaries and how different counties were coming into existence. And also some of the maps are absolutely beautiful pieces of artwork as well.
Like the one behind me here. This is a very, very old, heavily illustrated map of the Western Hemisphere. And I just love that. And I think it's really appropriate to talk about maps just after we've talked about John C. Fremont, the Pathfinder.
The Pathfinder.
So those, mapping the world was not an easy feat. You look back at those early maps, hundreds of years ago, where they're just big blank spaces because they don't know what's there, and I love it. And one of the ones, what do you call it, Michelle? when they have the map of the stars too. They have the Earth, the geography, and then they have the
Mm-hmm.
map of the stars, because it's all about navigation. The
Right.
unit created by the stars, and so you would have a map of the known Earth, the known world, and then you
Mm-hmm.
would have a map of the heavens, and it's just. I think it's fascinating. And I buy those old atlases, whenever I can find them in estate sales or, antique stores. And the changing political boundaries
Mm-hmm.
are just fascinating. It's and what places are called, what they're
Right.
called, how that changes, and there's just so much. Just like I said, Virginia and West Virginia, that's fairly
Mm-hmm.
recent in terms of mapping, but you go to Europe and look at the boundaries that change and the names of the countries.
Yes.
Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Um, look where it is and what name it was going under at any given time. It's
Exactly.
fascinating.
Yeah, and in my office in particular, I have a map of Oklahoma and Indian Territory. I have a map of Kansas. I have a map of Kansas Territory. And they're all very detailed and intricate. And as I said,
Mhm.
pieces of artwork. And the hallway outside my office, I have one of Indian Territory. I have another one. I have the state of Sequoia map. I have several that are hanging on the wall. And not only for me as a historian do I look at them and refer to them as reference, but also I look at them as pieces of artwork. So definitely give those maps a try when you are going to estate sales, flea markets, antique stores. I was in a lot of antique stores up in Prescott again, and found some interesting pieces. So yeah, they make fantastic gifts. And what you're doing by giving these, regifting these items, you're also being sustainable, and you're not buying things that are being newly produced. You're giving these other items new life.
One of the cool things I found in Boston, a few months ago when I was there in an antique store there in Waltham, where Karen and Lulu live, um, there was an 1872 map of the U.S. and it had Sheridan, Kansas on it. And I'm pretty sure the next map would not have had Sheridan, because Sheridan was just about gone. It's only there for
Mhm.
really 2.5, 3 years. So I'm pretty sure the next map would not have had it. And again, that's what a great treasure. So I got that one. That's at the museum now, at the Fort Wallace Museum. But with Fort Wallace on it. And then you have, it's a great teaching tool for us, because you have those, that northwestern tier of Kansas empty. Those towns and counties up there haven't been established yet in 1872. So everything along Highway 36 in northern Kansas, the northwest corner of Kansas, it's not there yet. And that,
Yeah.
what a great way to show kids, Atwood
Hmm.
wasn't there, Oberlin wasn't there, they come along afterwards. And again, just the evolution of how places were settled, and why places were settled for, um uh the Smoky Hill Trail follows, the Kansas River, so that's why, you're following the waterways. And so you get all that stuff. So there's just no end to what can be taught using a map. It's just, I love them, love them. They make such wonderful, wonderful gifts.
So if you head to your local antique store and you find some great maps, think about the historians in your life, think about the art lovers in your life, and pick those up because they make wonderful, wonderful gifts.
That's right. We'll be right back. We got more for you today. Lots of fun. It's Christmas in Lecompton, where thousands of antique, Victorian, and themed ornaments adorn 200 trees throughout the Territorial Capitol Museum. Open Wednesday through Sunday, the exhibit runs through January 1st.
Spend the day and experience all this small town has to offer, both historic sites, shops, food, and wine. Merry Christmas from historic Lecompton.
Howdy, I'm Seth Hayes, and welcome to my hometown, from then to now. Council Grove has a rich history, as deep as the prairie tallgrass. Spend the day visiting 25 historic sites, or explore the unique shops and restaurants, or mosey out of town along the Santa Fe Trail. You all visit my hometown, Council Grove, in the heart of the Flint Hills.
Okay, looks like it's time for our tour. Welcome to the Fort Wallace Museum. Here at the museum, you're going to find some really interesting stuff, like our replica stagecoach from the Butterfield Overland Dispatch. We've got facades from the fort buildings. We've got an 1870s flag. There's a plesiosaur that was discovered locally. We've got the Ray pump organ collection. We're a little bitty place with a great big story, and we'd love to have you.